What's doing? I'm Alec. Thank you for watching First Class Fatherhood. Today's guest is Dr. Dilip Joseph. Dilip Joseph was captured by the Taliban back in 2012 in Afghanistan and rescued by SEAL Team 6. Unfortunately, we lost a true American hero. Navy SEAL Nicolas Checque was killed on the mission to save Dr. Dilip Joseph's life. Navy SEAL Ed Byers received the Medal of Honor on this mission. I did an interview with Ed Byers. You can hear that on my previously uploaded video. Make sure you tap that subscribe button so you don't miss all the upcoming action here on First Class Fatherhood. And let's get going right now with my interview with Dr. Dilip Joseph right here on First Class Fatherhood. Joining me now, First Class Father, Dilip Joseph. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you very much, Alex. Yeah, good to be with you.
All right, let's start right here. How many kids do you have and how old are they?
Along with my wife, we have 5 kids. The oldest is 15 and our only daughter. And then we have 4 boys, and they range pretty much from 13 down to almost 6 now.
Wow. Yeah, I got 4 myself, so we got 3 boys and then a girl. What type of sports or activities are they all into?
Let's see, our oldest played volleyball for a while, and she's much more into music right now after trying and playing volleyball for a couple of years. She also does dancing on the side. And the oldest son, he has played soccer for a couple of years, and then he got into field hockey, and he's been continuing that. I think it's only a couple of terms since field hockey is mainly outside, although they do indoor field hockey as well. So it only kind of covers about 6 months out of the year, and we live in Colorado. Sometimes it's difficult to get out there, during winter. And then the 4th child is really into soccer, but he hasn't really done anything competitive yet. He hasn't started anything like a local club or anything like that. Just does a lot in the backyard, but he talks about it quite a bit. Leonardo Messi is a big favorite of his, so he talks about Messi a lot. We all get kind of a little tired of it.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the superstars of the sport for sure. Dilip, if you could, please, just take a minute here to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I am a physician by training. My background is really in public health and preventive medicine, so I do a lot of seminars and training rather than do a lot of clinical work. So I joined after I did a lot of my medical training itself. I joined a group called Morningstar Development and started going into Afghanistan as part of their medical work that they were doing quite a bit. They were increasing their medical footprint in the country, and you can imagine in a developing setting, especially a nation like Afghanistan, having gone through everything that it has in the mid to late 90s. The infrastructure for medicine and public health was very poor. So I joined in late 2000s and in early 2009, and did a lot of work in many rural areas for about 4 full years until I had an incident with the Taliban that actually got me out of Afghanistan, and not being able to go back has been a little difficult, but I've continued my work among the Afghans along with Morningstar Development till recently, and I've just stepped down from my medical work and just continue to do some educational platform with them.
Yeah, very impressive career that you've had here, Dilip, and we're going to get into that incident in just a minute here. But during all this then, about how old were you when you first became a dad, and how did becoming a father kind of change your perspective on life?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I got married when I was 29. I was still finishing medical school. I got into it a little late after working and pursuing public health as well. And then I became a dad when I was 31 years old. So that definitely has had an impact on me because it's one thing when you are kind of on your own or just kind of married, and then all of a sudden you have this precious young life in front of you, very vulnerable, very, um, yeah, I mean, just very precious in many ways, right? I still remember how life-changing it was in many ways every single time a child is born, but certainly my firstborn. And that sort of feeling continued as kids have continued to grow, and the phases that they go through. I think parenting just has a impact on you, even if it doesn't hit you very hard at any moment in the journey per se. I think overall, as you reflect on it and as you think through the challenges and the opportunities in parenting, I think it's hard not to have an impact as a father and as a parent.
Yeah, very well said. And so, getting into the incident, obviously, you were captured by the Taliban. Did you? How many kids did you have? I'm trying to do the math here. Did you? How many kids did you have at that time?
Yeah,
And what was kind of your reaction as a dad during that entire circumstances where you were captured?
yeah. At that time when I was captured, I believe I was 39. So it's going on about close to 7 years, 7.5 years now. And we only had four children at that time, and my fourth was only like 8 or 9 months old. And I remember having such a difficult time with coming to grips with the idea of not being able to impact a child, that age. I mean, it catches me even now when I think about it. But with the others, they were 8, 5, and 3. Not that by any means they were grown, but I kept thinking about all of them. But certainly my fourth child, who was a baby, still an infant at that time, and kept thinking that it's just not fair that a child could grow up without knowing his or her father. Certainly same for either parent. But I really grappled with that idea and struggled as much as I can, knowing very well that situation that I was in was very dire. There was no reason to hope that I was going to kind of make it out of that alive. So I think grappling with those ideas of what it means to have an impact on children in that situation that I was in has somehow impacted me even since then. It's not always that you catch yourself while you're in a moment of teaching a lesson or teaching a valuable virtue per se, that you're always going to have the bigger picture perspective, right? So you have to kind of remind yourself, even as a parent, even as someone decades older than your child, that boy, each moment is precious and each moment is kind of worth thinking deeply about.
Yeah, good stuff, Dilip. And I know, obviously, I mean, your story is very well covered and documented. Your rescue, SEAL Team 6 came in to get you. I've had the honor of having Navy SEAL hero, a Medal of Honor recipient, Ed Byers, on the podcast here, who's a first-class father as well. Yeah, and obviously well covered in your book. Now, during your time over there, and you've spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, obviously outside of being captured, what is the feeling that you get about dads over there in Afghanistan and their relationship with their kids as opposed to the American father and their relationship here with the kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. As much as I've traveled around, Alec, I would say when it really comes down to it, the very basics, the fundamentals of parenting or aspiring something great for your kids is probably the same anywhere in the world. I think the methodology differs. The culture obviously differs. From the American perspective, we understand Afghanistan mainly as a Muslim nation. But then, my time in Afghanistan kind of impacted me in such a way, especially having had the opportunity to kind of cover about, I want to say either 10 or 12, I can't remember, provinces out of the 34 provinces. So covered a fair bit of the nation, doing various things, if it was evaluating or monitoring certain projects, or trying to evaluate the impact of the infrastructure that they already have or aspiring to have. So I picked up on a lot of the virtues that they have, and some of it boils down to similar things. So I explain all that just to kind of remind myself and you and the viewers to think of each other primarily as people who are just human beings trying to crave for something better for ourselves and also our families, our children, especially as parents. And that's been a very interesting thing for me to remind myself as I think about other cultures and other religion, if you will, and religions, and various filters that I have, and seeing world differently than I probably ought to.
Yeah, I mean, very well said here, Dilip, with a lot of good information. And one of the things I think for a lot of Americans, myself included, Afghanistan obviously came to the forefront after 9/11, where all of a sudden it became where people started to know more about Afghanistan. I think we see it as, a third world country that doesn't have very much technology, and it has very little, but it seems like a poor country, but everybody's got a very expensive weapon and unlimited ammunition, it seems like. So it's kind of like, well, wow,
Yeah.
there's no factory there pumping out these guns. Where are they coming from? And I've had Muhammad Gulab on the podcast here, who rescued lone survivor Marcus Luttrell, and asking him about it, like, well, what's the story here? Like, where, why are they so pumped full of guns? And where is all this, like, Taliban, Al Qaeda,
Yeah.
ISIS? How does all this stuff, like, keep popping up one after the other?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alec. I mean, where does the history start? Where was this before the Western world came to know about Afghanistan? It's really intriguing that when you look at some of the pictures and read the history of Afghanistan going back just half a century, 50s, 60s, even up to 70s, before the kingdoms collapsed and Russia kind of took over. I think it's very intriguing to note that the humanism or the communistic lifestyle or the mindset that Russia brought in left a huge spiritual vacuum in the country. And unfortunately, from what it was in the 50s and 60s to be known as the motto or the phrase that went along with Afghanistan as a nation back then was the Switzerland of Central Asia. Just imagine that it's along the way of the Silk Road, road back to Jerusalem. It was a very thriving nation in terms of trade. It's only the only nation in that entire region, whether it's South Asia or Central Asia, to kick out the British all on its own. Every other South Asian nation were under the empire of the British Empire. So there's something to think about how a nation that powerful, that stable, then became the pawn of Islamic regimes, or this sort of unstable, from all aspects, spiritual, economic, educational, moral, if you will. How does a history of a nation change or shift that quickly, right? So within a matter of a few decades. So that we might have to just watch and see how this all unfolds. But this certainly was not the history of the nation.
Yeah, these are obviously very complicated questions. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, politics-wise and money-wise, and just power-wise. So it's just it's a very complicated issue. And obviously, like you said, people at the nature, we all kind of want the same thing for our kids, no matter where we are on the planet. We want them to be loved and feel like they're appreciated, and we want to see them succeed. We don't want to see them hurt, or we don't want to see them in trouble and depressed. So it's like we all, as fathers or parents, we all kind of want the same thing for our kids, no matter where we are. And getting back to what happened with you here, how much do your kids, are they aware of your situation, of what happened, you being captured and the rescue, or when would you feel comfortable with them reading your book about the entire issue?
Sure. As I said, my kids were 8, 5, and 3, and then 9 months when I went through this, and then our fifth child that was born 2 years after this event. They all know about it, and only my oldest have actually read the book in its totality, and the others keep asking. I mean, I would have no trouble for my 13-year-old to read it now. And one of the ways that I engage them in the work that I do is I try my best to, since we have 5 kids, I have to kind of rotate them in my domestic trips, and once a year I'll try to take one of them in an international trip that I take, just for them to get a flavor for not only my work, but why I do what I do. The fact that we should never define our life just according to the conveniences and the comfort that we want to see our life through. It's not just about ourselves. It has to be beyond that, and how we impact the society around us is very much a virtue that I try to impart in my children. So I would say, just to answer your question, they all have varied understanding of what actually happened, but also from the immediate locality, our community. While this was all going on, as you said in the beginning, it became especially as the death of this Navy SEAL Nicolas Checque became very known. That became then the nature of the story as it was unfolding. The main premise of the story, if you will. And I think in due time, as they are getting into their adolescent years, I don't mind them, reading the whole story and asking me questions. But as they do ask random questions here and there, I tend to tell them. And I also make it a point to, as my kids have gone through the 5th grade, right now we have a 9th grader, 7th grader, 5th grader, then the 2nd grader, and a kindergartner. As one of the classes that I've continued to go through in their local school is the 5th grade. So as they go through 5th grade, they hear the story from my perspective and their classmates, and they get to ask more questions. Of course, by then they already know the gist of the story anyway, but it's kind of neat for them to experience it from a classroom setting as well.
I would imagine so, yeah. When your dad has been rescued by SEAL Team 6, that's a pretty cool story for a kid to be able to tell in school, for sure. And mentioning, too, obviously, American hero Nicolas Checque, who was killed in the operation, in the rescue attempt. Have you ever had the chance to meet Nick's family or speak to his family, or were you present at Ed Byers' Medal of Honor ceremony?
No, Nick's memorial service in Afghanistan, I would say what they call a RAM ceremony. I actually had the utmost pleasure of attending that, but the memorial service, one of my colleagues along with a friend actually went for that, and it took almost a year and a half, not for the lack of trying, for me to connect with Nick's mom. She had gone through a terrible time, which she apologized for, and I said, ma'am, you have no reason to apologize, although it's taken a while for us to connect with each other. Since then, I actually haven't connected, although we have a common friend that let us let each other know how each of us are doing. I think one of the reasons why it took so long is because Nick's dad, who brought them up along with his 2 siblings, his stepdad passed away 6 months after Nick passed away, and then 6 months after that, Nick's mom lost her home, and she had just gone through one thing after another. It had at that time been a very, very difficult time for her to go through. So it took a while for us to connect, and we just had a really amicable conversation. As difficult as it was, how do you talk to someone who kind of laid their life, the mother of someone who just laid their life so that you can continue to live? It's just it's hard to think about it even now, 7.5 years later. But in some ways, I suppose the consolation in my mind is these guys are just, as you already know, Alec, these guys are just incredible in what they do, and the commitment that they show not only to their unit, to themselves, and the code of ethics that they follow, and the unit and the military and our nation, is exemplary. It's just beyond reproach. So in some ways, even as they sign up for something like this, it is with the understanding that, I could lose my life for this. And in some ways, I think even in what I do, there's a much lower scale of that sort of thinking. You have to have that sort of commitment in what you do, and what you're signing up to. And man, I have nothing but amazing respect for our military in general. But then I think the special op teams kind of take it to the next level.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Dilip. I've had almost about 50 Navy SEALs on the podcast here. I'm very just humbled by what they do. I'm just amazed that we have people like that exist, because it's just amazing what they're capable of. So, very well said there. And reeling it back into you here as a father, what are the most important top values you would say that you're hoping to instill in your kids?
Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot, and something that I continue to think about. I've over time, and as I said before, as I continue to evolve as a father and as a parent, I think one of the things that has struck me in the recent past is how much some of the lessons and some of the virtues, the main ones I would say, are integrity, compassion, commitment, and they all sort of revolve around this theme that I've been thinking about, is trying to keep things kind of simple. When you want to impart something, whether it's in your work, in your daily life, lessons to your children, or in your marriage, or whatever it might be, we all come up with certain objectives and certain goals, and maybe even some action points, like this is how I'm going to get it done. But I've been reminded more and more in the recent past, due to many various circumstances, that maybe trying to impart or trying to create a better environment, an atmosphere for those virtues to sort of take its roots, is more integral, much more important than those action points of this is how I'm going to do it. Because I know I have fallen flat many times trying to impart a certain thing, because if I have in my mind figured out, okay, this is how I'm going to do it, and then there's so many variables, you're essentially talking about another human being who doesn't think or act the way you do, does not have the circumstances or the environment that you've had, in you having figured out what you have figured out. And even then, you have to remind yourself that you've only figured it out partly, and you're still learning, right? So although the virtues are important to remind yourself, I think it's so much more important that you create, whether it's atmosphere of peace, atmosphere of joy, atmosphere of love, those sort of things, to then, these are the non-quantifiables, right? No matter how much you try, you just can't put a value on it, because they're just beyond a value that you can put on it. So I think that's been very important for me to think through. How do I create an environment so that the virtues that are important to me can be instilled? They will take shape, they'll take root, and they'll grow and show fruit in due time.
Yeah, good stuff, Dilip. And I'm always curious about, like, what type of disciplinarian are you as a dad, and has it changed since your rescue in this incident? Have you changed your discipline style, or has there been real big impact on you as a difference as a dad since the incident?
Yeah, it's funny. I thought about that a little bit, and I realized the fact that I am probably a little bit more strict than my parents have been with me, which is kind of interesting, because you tend to like recreate what you've experienced, right? Most of the time. But I think my parents, especially my dad, was very he was a very disciplined disciplinarian, and I can only think about maybe 2 or 3 times that I've been disciplined, either getting a smack on my hand, or or he never uh, never did he do it in a destructive way. He was always very constructive in the way he approached discipline. My mom, on the other hand, she was always talking. I was always getting a talking to from my mom. But I was always much more closer to my mom than I was with my dad. And with my kids, I've kind of kept that in the back of my mind. I think I've only had to maybe spank them with a spoon or something, maybe 2 or 3 times each of the child. Although, as the younger ones tend to get a lot more talking to than I've done with the older ones. So I keep thinking about that. Even when I create, I think one of the best things that I got to experience as a child is anytime my parents have had to kind of go through a disciplinary situation, they did a lot more sitting down and talking with me and my sister as children, and I tried to instill that. Whether it was before my incident or after my incident, have that time of kind of breaking down. Okay, what happened? Did you understand why? And 1 or 2 times I've had to apologize to my kids for disciplining, because I knew that I was reacting maybe to the hurt that they were not listening or something like that. And then I go back and a few times I've had to do that. So I think that's something that I keep close to in my mind and try my best to follow, because I think it's important as a child is trying to learn a lesson that they understand, wait a second, my parents or my dad or my mom, they're doing this because they love me. They're not doing this because, they're just going crazy, or, they just want to have their way or something like that. And I think that's very important in a disciplinary situation, that it is at the end of the day, at the end of the situation, something that they can truly look back and enjoy having learned a valuable lesson, rather than have some hurt to carry, as they move on.
Yeah, well said. And what's next for you here, Dilip? What kind of plans or goals do you have here for yourself for the future?
Yeah, I've been working on a book that I've been thinking through ever since I was in med school. Just kind of thinking through the ideas of holistic health. In our society, we tend to do a lot of reactionary medicine. When you get sick, I've been dealing with allergies, as I tend to do during the season every year, and we approach health in a very reactionary way. So I've been thinking through various principles of holistic health that tends to incorporate the physical with the emotional and mental and also spiritual aspects of characteristics of health. And so that's one big project in the pipeline. I'm hoping that I can get it done sometime this year. I still do oversee a project that I'm running in Delhi, India. So if it wasn't for the corona, I would have probably already traveled once by now, but now I'm hoping maybe in July or August I can head back there. And so between working part-time with Morningstar and kind of part-time with the new nonprofit that I've started to do some seminars and training about holistic health, and my family kind of keeps me busy with all these moving parts.
I bet. All right, last thing I'm going to hit you with here, Dilip. I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for the new dad or for that about-to-be father who's out there listening?
Yeah, man, that's a great question and a great point to have. I think one of the best overall advice that I've received as a young man before I got into a married life or being a father is to truly keep things simple. And I've not always taken that to heart. I think that's probably one of the best advice that I've received, and I can certainly one that I can give to others, especially new dads. When you impart on a new journey, you always want to think through, like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? I think that's all great to be able to think through all of that. But then when you start to implement certain things, it's actually good to remind yourself, life is not just about a set of rules. And I think there's enough, especially living in the society that we live. One of the greatest things about America as a nation is just having that liberty and freedom. And I think part of that is also giving yourself a bit of space to not intentionally mess up, but to know that, hey, with the freedom also comes the possibility of messing up, but how you get up from that is just as valuable as realizing, my goodness, I mean, sometimes we can easily make some of the mistakes the very focal point of our behavioral model or the definition of who we are, but that's not how life ought to be like, right? So to be able to remind ourselves that some of these virtues that we hold very dear, whether it is loving others, respecting others the way you want to be respected or loved, it's just really just as important to remind ourselves. So as we care for ourselves and as we understand ourselves better, I think that then has this amazing opportunity to love and respect and treat and care for others because we value that for ourselves. So I think as a young father, I think it's important to understand what are the foundational things that they themselves stand upon, and realizing, deepening that understanding for yourself is just as best of a care that you can give to others.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Dilip Joseph, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Pleasure, Alec. Thank you for your time.